areas where they can bury the cable, other areas they can't, so they put these things called blankets, which are cement coverings over the cable to try to keep it down in place. And that's what our fishermen, when they're dragging, they catch up on the blanket. And we've had different fishermen, I've had different fishermen that their nets have been destroyed. And because there's no mitigation or insurance fund, the nets are very, very expensive. And you know, one repair was like $18,000, so he couldn't fish because he didn't have a net. So now he can't fish because he doesn't have a net because of the offshore wind. So we really need to have some kind of insurance for them, because right now there's nothing, and they can barely fish as it is. So we're also trying to work with our Connecticut fishermen, and I won't belabor this too long, but to try to have them, if we're going to have offshore wind needs scout and safety vessels, so our fishermen could be retrained to be able to do their scout work and their safety work. But they have to be trained to the highest international maritime standards. Fishermen are kind of carved out of that. So I'm working with a company that so far has trained 83 fishermen in Connecticut to do this kind of work. It's not a full-time job, but it can be used as filler work when they can't fish. And so far it has been great because they haven't had any fishing vessels or when they've been working on the group, like they were working for Ørsted. Ørsted hasn't destroyed any fishing gear because the fishermen know where everything is. So that has worked out really well. So we're trying to continue that to provide an opportunity for fishermen should they choose to do it. Okay, I'm going to stop talking about fishermen now.
All right. We've been joined by Rep. Doug Dubitsky. And Doug, we just went over a little offshore wind. And so there were a couple things that I highlighted I wanted to talk about briefly. I think this is probably going to be the one that will take a lot of time. Motor vehicle property tax. Anybody want to tackle that? That's what they've heard so far on that. For those who don't know, they're looking to do away with motor vehicle taxes, which means that now the tax will be on the burden of the homeowner. So
it sounds great in theory.
If you thought your property tax on homes was higher before, it's going to be a little more. So, does anybody want to tackle that?
I could certainly comment about it. I'm not sure I'd be able to tackle it.
Yeah.
There have, for many years, there has been a push by representatives and senators from the big cities to eliminate car tax. Like many issues, they don't understand, possibly don't care how it affects the more rural areas of the state. Unfortunately, what happens is when you eliminate the car tax, homeowners and business owners will absorb that money. Towns will get essentially the same amount of money regardless of what you tax. They're still going to get the same amount of money. So if you eliminate the tax on cars, the tax on properties will go up. There is a feeling, which I do not subscribe to, that the car tax is more regressive in some way, and that because renters, many of them have cars, if they eliminate the car tax, then renters won't be paying tax. But obviously, if the tax is shifted from the renter's car to the landlord's property, the landlord is going to increase the rent. But like many things in the legislature, there is a willful blindness to unintended consequences. And so one of the things that I always try to do is explain from the perspective of the people out here in Eastern Connecticut how their legislation will affect us and what the unintended consequences are even in their own cities, which they don't seem to very often take into consideration. So I don't think it's a very smart move to eliminate the tax on cars. I think it would just be a shift in taxation because, ultimately the towns will get the same amount of money as will the state. And I think having it on cars actually spreads out the tax base to people who don't own properties. So that, I don't know if my opinion tackles the situation, but it addresses it to some extent.
I can tell you that when I was the mayor of Groton, and that was in 2013, they were looking at eliminating the car tax then. And that was going to mean $8 million not coming to Groton. So where do you make that up when you're the mayor or the first selectman? You don't have any place to go. You'd have to go to the property tax owner and raise your property tax rates. It's the only place to go. So we fought vehemently against it. I do not agree with what they want to do. It's, again, the representatives and senators from the big cities where their mill rates are very high because they don't have a tax base, like New London or New Haven, I think it's 77 is their mill rate. So their car taxes are expensive. But many of us just don't agree with them. And we try to use our experience as former mayors or selectmen to say, you're just leaving that burden. You still have to raise the same amount of money, and it will just get shifted to the property tax owner. In addition to, if you're in a rental facility, if you're in an apartment, your landlord will raise the rent to cover their property tax. The Democrats want to put a cap on how much you can raise the rent too, so that's another double whammy. That's a bill that's circulating through the legislature right now. So I'm vehemently opposed. It was eye-opening to me when I was first elected to the Senate. There hadn't really been people that had been mayors or selectmen in that Senate before. So when I explained this to them, because at first some of our people were like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. But when you explain it, they're like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. It's just a shift. And our property taxes are already out of control. The property tax owners and the people that own property can't take any more, certainly not that kind of increase. Many of our towns are looking at significant increases. I'm not sure what's happening here. But some of the towns I represent are looking at 10% increases, 13% increases in their budgets because of their contractual obligations. And that's significant for property tax owners. So wanted to give you a little landscape of how terrible that is. Sounds great.
And I won't repeat what you both said, but I would agree 100%. It just shifts it from a certain group of people to another group of people, and many of those people don't pay property taxes that own cars, especially in the cities.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right, and there's a big push in the legislature about affordable housing. And everybody's screaming that rents are too high and that it's impossible to find a place to live in the state. And yet, policy after policy after policy that's passed by the legislature makes it more and more expensive to rent properties, to own properties for landlords. It puts more and more regulations on them, more and more requirements, more burdens. Things in various committees, the Judiciary Committee and the Public Health Committee, they can all affect how a landlord rents properties. So, for example, there's a bill that prevents landlords from doing background checks on tenants before they rent to them. Well, that may sound nice if you're an advocate for rehabilitating convicted criminals. Well, that's great. We want convicted criminals after they've served their time to be able to have a place to live too. However, what it does to landlords is it puts them in danger because they have no idea who they're renting to. that increases their insurance rates. It increases a lot of different costs and convinces some to get out of the market altogether. Well, what does that do for affordable housing? It goes the wrong way. But there's, as I said, there is a sort of a willful a willful neglect of looking at the long-term consequences of various bills, because people do take actions based on what the law is, and the legislature doesn't always anticipate what those actions will be.
The other part of that, motor vehicle thing, I read about that, I guess, last year, and I said, oh, were they changing the evaluation method? Why did they delay that? With that?
I'm sorry, why did they want?
They delayed the reevaluation of the value of the cars. There was a better technique of doing the evaluation of the cars than they were doing. That would have been beneficial to the car owner. Why did they stop? Why didn't they do that? They delayed doing that. Why? That's what it says here, too. It's supposed to go into effect last year, and it's been delayed now next year.
I don't know why they
I
made
think
the
that goes
decision
into
they
effect
did.
this October.
Well, that's what it said.
Yeah.
Why, for what
Just
reason
because,
they delayed?
I wish I
Lack
could
of
tell
money?
you
They
other
wouldn't have
than
money?
the legislature just moves at a snail's pace and somebody trying to make those changes on how they do the evaluation and getting it out to all the assessors on how to do the evaluation. So that is effective as of October. But that would be beneficial to, hopefully, the person who owns the car.
It is pretty subjective. There are a couple of different methods. One is fair market value. You look at a car and you say, well, that car is worth $2,000. Another method is go by Blue Book. Another method is you go by, what is it, the sale, the retail value of the car minus depreciation. I think that's what they're going to, is that one. Frankly, I think that, I just paid tax on a car that is probably worth $500, and I just paid tax on a $5,000 car because that's what the calculation is, even though that's not what the car is worth.
Are they going to change the
I'm not
25-year-old rule?
I'm not sure that's fair.
Are they looking at changing the 25-year-old rule for cars?
I have not heard that.
I think that's staying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think during COVID, the valuations of cars got very skewed because there were no cars in the market. Do you remember? You couldn't,
It's crazy.
selling a used car, they were worth so much more. So I think, part of the idea was to sort of reset that also. And looking at the retail minus with depreciation rather than what the market value was. But that's what we know about that right now. Do you have any other highlights that you
Oh,
want
I've
to talk
got lots,
about
but
here?
I would prefer actually to open
Okay.
it up to the audience because we came to ask some questions and try to find out what's going on in the legislature now. If anybody in the audience has any questions. Again, there was a booklet in the back that gives some of the highlights, but you probably.
I can tell you what some of the highlights going on in the budget if you're interested. It's very exciting. Appropriations is a committee that you never want to be on as a legislature because it is, are you on very good? You're not.
No, it's a committee I never want to be on.
Yes, it's awesome. I've been on it for 8 years. We have thousands of meetings, and the governor comes out with his budget, and normally the appropriations committee comes out with our own budget, which is, we'll take what the governor says and look at it and change it usually. And there was a lot of potential changes to it. And the appropriations chairs, which are the majority party, decided we are not doing a budget. So we are going to be staying with the governor's budget. And, but somehow they were able to manage to have money in the budget, which is significant. I think it's about $140 million this year for raises for state employees for the CBAC employees union, and it's about 70,000 people, and it's a 4.5% raise, because there's a 2% and then 2.5% and steps, and we don't know where we are financially. We're looking at a deficit for next year, and I find it really irresponsible that we're not doing a budget, but we are allocating money that we don't know that we have for raises for 70,000 people in the state of Connecticut, many of which are not actually even coming into work. They're working at home in their pajamas. And, some are great, but I don't want to vote for any kind of raise until people actually have to come back to work, because I'm tired of having agencies that I have to deal with where I can't get anybody, and if I do, it's on Zoom, and everything's taking 3 times as long as it should because nobody's actually back to work. So that did pass out of appropriations. We might be hearing that Wednesday or Thursday of this week. And it's hard because every single different union is grouped into this. So you have different people that I think should be worthy of raises, but they're all grouped together. So you have nurses that have worked incredible overtime at our state facilities. But then you also have other people working in other agencies that have never actually come back into work. And you don't have the choice to pick between them. It's all lumped together, so you have to say yes or no. And I believe that passed out of the Appropriations Committee on a party line vote, unfortunately. But that's kind of what's going on with our budget. For appropriations, there's a lot of things that I think are, and I don't want to be in control of this meeting, I just want to highlight some things that I think are really troubling. We have many legislators that think that they're doing a good job by passing some kind of legislation that's going to send a message or is meaningful for them. And we have one particular senator who has a bill in, which I think is absolutely devastating. It's getting rid of tips for bartenders and waitresses, because she thinks that tips are racist. And it goes back to the days where she said that the plantation owner would tip a slave, so nobody should get tips. So what has happened is the people working in that industry, if you calculate the numbers, I have many of them in my district because Mystic is the foodie capital now of Connecticut and probably New England, and there are people working in restaurants. They are making 6 figures. They work really hard. It's really busy. The last thing they want is to eliminate tips because they're not paid minimum wage. They don't care that they're paid minimum wage because they make all their money on their tips. And they know that if the restaurants have to pay them minimum wage or above minimum wage, no one is going to be able to afford a hamburger when they go out to eat because the price of food is going to go way up. And then people will not tip. So this is a bill that has been pushed and is gaining traction for an industry when the industry does not want it. The people working in it are saying, no, we don't want it. And this has a good chance of passing out of the Senate. I'm hoping that my friends in the House will stop it because there's a lot more of you than there are of me in the Senate. But there's a bunch of bills like that that are not helpful. They claim to be doing the right thing, but they're really hurting the people that are actually in that industry themselves. The Restaurant Association is completely against it. The distributors that distribute to the Restaurant Association are completely against it, and the people working in restaurants are completely against it, but it may in fact pass.
Can I ask you who's for it, why they're pushing this?
It was brought out of the Senate by a senator who tried this last year. I can't remember what union she represents, or she was a union organizer, but I can't tell you why, but this is something that she feels very strongly about.
So one person,
Out of the Labor Committee.
one person can push this
yeah.
onto everyone else?
Oh, yeah.
That's incredible.
Who is this person?
This is Senator Kushner.
Kushner?
Did she move here from California?
No, she's from Danbury. She's from the other side of the state. That was a good guess, though. No. And, the thing is, I almost feel like we need to take the doctor's motto at first, do no harm. That's what we should be doing to the people that we represent. And we're trying to do things that make people's lives better. not trying to, constrain or put more regulations on that makes everything more difficult and more costly. And I thought it was really telling last week, and of course I couldn't keep my mouth shut. There was a press conference that the Democrats had about price gouging of not restaurants, of grocery stores. And they were saying that the price of groceries has gone sky high, how can this be
We
happening?
must investigate.
And I'm like, it's because of you guys.
Right.
You put a meals tax on, you want to tax things that are on our roads, it costs more to bring our foods here. Have you seen the price of electricity in the state of Connecticut? They have to have all these, freezers and refrigerators, so don't blame the rest, sorry, I keep calling them restaurants. Don't blame the grocery stores. Think about what your policies are doing to create this situation. Of course, they didn't like that, but I couldn't let it go because I'm like, I actually said it's so hypocritical for you to be sitting here and saying that.
This was a big I told you so year. A number of things that I and others in my party have warned about are coming to fruition, such as this is on track to be the year with the highest fatalities, highway fatalities in decades. And last, or 2 years ago, I remember getting up on the House floor and saying, if you legalize marijuana for recreational purposes, you are going to have the highest fatality rates in decades. And they laughed and they said, oh, nobody's going to go driving stoned. And,
We'll get more pot, yeah.
and now their response is, well, you can't prove causation. You can't prove that the fatality rate spiked because of the legalization.
Well,
And my response is, well, of course I can't, because there is no test for it. That's why we didn't want it in the first place.
And furthermore, we have tied the hands of the police such that when they stop and pull somebody over, it could reek of marijuana, but they're not allowed to search. They can't even ask if it's okay to search the vehicle. We have taken that tool out of the toolbox. We've removed almost every tool out of the toolbox for police to do. So, you put this in place, and then there's nothing to kind of reel it in and put checks and balances on it. There's nothing. The police have really been hand-tied in this state with what we've done.
Yeah, just imagine this. You've got two cars driving down the road, and a police car sees them both. In one car, the driver is drinking a beer. In the other car, the driver has a big hookah sitting on his lap, just blowing smoke everywhere.
Smoke.
The cop is legally prohibited from pulling over the car with the driver smoking pot. Legally prohibited. We'll get in serious trouble if it does. We'll pull over the guy drinking the beer, not the guy smoking pot.
Yes, ma'am.
Jenny Kipsikevich.
How are you?
I'm well. I'm a Plainfield resident and a landowner here. I apologize for stepping in a little bit late, Heather, but I caught the end of your conversation about wind. I think your focus was on wind, but I'm going to take this in a different route and focus on agriculture. Okay. And I noticed that in the major issues packet, there are no items that hit agriculture provided here. And so I just want to kind of point a couple things out and then ask a question. So we know that based on the Farms Under Threat 2040 report done by American Farmland Trust, that if we continue to do business as usual in the state of Connecticut, 55,000 acres are expected to be converted over from ag into parking lots, buildings, structures. And I can tell you that not 1 acre of ag land has ever been converted back. And so when I hear where, our Commissioner of Agriculture actually references that those 70,000 acres that they're not even land acres, those are, water acres. Are we looking at the effects of wind energy on fish populations? Because there are studies that are showing that the vibration of wind energy can impact animals, and I have livestock, so they are showing that wind energy is actually deforming. Animals are not growing properly, and they're actually getting deformities, and they can't stand. So are we looking at what the impact of all of this wind energy is going to actually have on fisheries and their livelihood? And then, here's my question, because there's just so much embedded in agriculture, and I think we're missing a really big mark sometimes. Where do we stand with siting solar smartly on ag land, and how are we going to stop that urban sprawl, the paving over of agricultural lands? Because I'm sorry, folks, we need food, and so while I make food in Plainfield, I can't make food to support my neighborhood, yet alone my town. So we need to, be really mindful about this. So, Heather, what are you doing, or how are you standing in terms of supporting policy, so to speak, that will limit or have more, maybe there needs to be more incentives for people who are building million-square-foot warehouses, that they have to, start considering rooftops before they consider ag land. I guess I have lots to ask, but sure, don't want to take the form.
So, first of all, I'll make it clear, I am not a wind supporter. I have been wind's biggest thorn, probably, in their side. If you look at the first time the wind bill passed, I spoke for about 25 minutes, and I almost killed the bill. I wish I would have talked more, because we were out of time. And put them on the record to establish what they called a CES, which is the Committee on Environmental Standards that we set for wind power. This is a group of about 42 of us. And there's industry folks, there's a few legislators, and we try to set the criteria for the environmental requirements, but it's suggestive to the DEEP Commission. And she can look at it and cross stuff out, which she has done. So a lot of the things that we wanted to require, one of the big things about fish stock populations, which we are doing, but one of the big issues is that we never had a baseline to start with, right? So we're starting from scratch. We worked with, I know the Mystic Aquarium and the Yukon Avery Point is doing some work, which is funded through the wind farm companies. They have to be able to fund it. So to me, that's sort of the devil's advocate. You're getting a report by somebody who's funding it by the industry that wants to actually do it. So there's a lot of different information. I am personally convinced that the pounding into the bedrock, the noise, there's a great documentary called The Truth About Wind. If you want to look at it, you can find it on YouTube. You can hear how loud it sounds for the animals, and there is a lot of data that shows whales in particular become disoriented from the sound because the decibels are so loud. It causes what they call temporary blindness, and they surface in areas where they shouldn't normally, and they're running into ships. And we've had 43 whales killed along our shoreline, which we've never had before. And so one of the things that we asked for was to have these wind farms to be gravity-based, which means that, I can't think of what you call the big pole. It's held down by cement rather than being jammed into bedrock. They refuse to do that. They do that in Europe because it's cheaper to jam it in the bedrock. So that was one of the things the Environmental Standards Committee requested, and that's something that the DEP Commissioner said no. So they are going to be pounding it into bedrock to secure these wind farms. So I agree with you. There needs to be more done as far as that is concerned. As far as the Siting Council on solar, there is a bill that I support that was put in by our new leader, who's also one of the chairs on environment, which says that if a solar farm is going to be sited in a community, that the community has the ability to decide whether they accept it or not, which I think is really important. Of course, the DEP Commissioner doesn't want that because it's taking power away from the Siting Council, so that's one thing that we're doing, but I am not on the Environment Committee, and I would love to work more on what we can do to help maintain our farms and increase having more successful farms. Ann and I spend a lot of time on unsuccessful farms right now in other towns. But whatever we can do, I'd love to meet with you at some point in time, and I'm open to that, and I would advocate pay for that, and Doug would probably be great because he's actually on that committee. I hope I answered your questions.
I just want to take this opportunity to make sure that the public continues to keep agriculture at the forefront. We get very, and don't get me wrong, I want my taxes to stay low. You know, I'm committed to Plainfield, so certainly taxes are important, but I think also where our food is coming from is equally important, because we'll all get hungry pretty quickly if we don't have a farmer as a friend. And the farmers are really working hard and advocating, and here's just some startling stats. 35% of dairy farmers will not be dairy farmers at the end of 2024. So like, you know, if we don't get behind our farmers at, you know, a federal, a state level, and I do feel that there are forces working against agriculture, we're going to have a real problem, and we better get very comfortable with importing our food from China or eating a lab-grown piece of meat.
And I think that's a really good way to frame it, because when you say, I say that about seafood, I say when you put all our fishermen out of business, you're going to be buying your fish if you eat it from China, and you're not going to know what you're getting. And people are like, oh, right, we don't know what we're getting in anything from China, right? There's no quality controls. So I think that's a really good way to frame it. I would love to work with you if you have ideas, because I'm not a farmer, I think I am, but I'm not, on what we can do statewide to help assist you. We've tried to do things like anaerobic digestion to help, you know, with manure and things like that, but what can we do? I don't have those answers, so maybe we could all meet and you could come give us some creative ideas. I'd love to have them, and I would love to help market the fact that, you know, you want to know what you're eating. There's just a big thing today in the Daily International News, if you read it, about all the foods that you have in your cupboard, and I happened to was looking at that while I was on an appropriations meeting, and even like all these things that are really terrible for you that are in your cupboard, that I'm looking, I'm like, oh my God, I have.
Last year, I introduced a bill to mandate that any solar project that is built on farmland posts a bond for the restoration of the farmland at the end of the useful life of the panels. That did go through, passed, signed into law, and it is now the law. There are any number of farm-related bills that I'm working on in any given year. Many of the things that I do, people propose bills that they think are helpful to farmers, and they're actually not. And I have to explain to them life from the perspective of somebody who lives on a farm. And I'm also an attorney, and most of my clients are farmers, and have been for at least 20 years. So I understand farming to the extent that anybody can. You know, everybody sees farming from their own little perspective. I try very hard to, like, I'm not a dairy guy, but I've been to most of the big dairy farms in the state and dozens of smaller ones. Talk to the farmers, talk to see how things are going. I go to the meetings of the New London and the Windham County Farm Bureau. I generally go to the annual meeting of the Connecticut Farm Bureau. I just got an award from the, what's it called, the land, the trust for, oh, I can't remember the name of it now. The Land Preservation Trust in Connecticut with regard to farmland. So I'm always working to try to ensure that farmers have the resources they need. I have been working on changes and enhancements to the PA 490 statute, which is the statute that allows farmers to be assessed at farm value as opposed to retail value for their land. And that, that includes all sorts of things. I was the one that introduced the bill. There was it used to be that assessors would randomly take a zoning lot out of your farm. So if you had a farm that was 10 acres and you lived in an area that was 4-acre zoning, the assessor would just take 4 acres out of your farm and say that's residential. Well, I introduced and marshaled through and was passed, signed into law, the law that says that you can't do that. If you have an area around your house that is half an acre that you use for residential purposes and the rest of it is farm, well, you get taxed half an acre for residential purposes and the rest is farm. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on every year. If you've got any specific issue that you're interested in discussing, I've done a lot of work in the livestock statutes, the assessment statutes, the farm equipment statutes, where this year we're working on fencing and loose animal statutes. So there's a lot that goes on. It's all eventually got to go through the Environment Committee, and I'm sort of the farm guy on the Environment Committee. So if you've got any specific issues, please feel free to ask.
Were you able to push off this forced mandate for electric cars for the year?
So far.
Thank you. What's that?
So far.
So far.
Yeah. That
But you got the
went
Green Monster.
through- That went through the Environment Committee. That's, whether that goes through or not is doubtful in my
Green Monster?
opinion.
Well, the
It did-
governor's actually said,
I'm sorry?
the governor's actually said, we have them on tape saying maybe we should hold off on.
Yeah, it's, when you look at it, essentially there is one legislator who is retiring. She is very prominent on the Environment Committee, and she's got this one enormous bill that covers virtually everything that has to do with the environment, and she wants to get this thing through as her swan song before she retires. It is massive. They call it the Green Monster, and part of it is this decarbonization of the state, which includes eliminating fossil fuel use for automobiles, for trucks, for houses. So, it's one thing to say, okay, it would be great if the state didn't produce any emissions. But when you think about it, what does that mean? Everybody drives an electric car. Well, electric cars create more emissions than gas-powered cars because most of the emissions these days in a car come from the tires, not from the exhaust pipe. And because electric cars weigh so much more, they emit more emissions than fuel-powered cars. You've also got the situation, let's say we all go all electric cars. So that means every gas station in every town is going to close, right? We don't need gas stations anymore. So I tell the legislators who want this, you go talk to the gas stations in your town and tell them that you're about to put them out of business. See how well that goes over. And if you ever sit and watch a busy gas station these days, just, you know, five minutes, just sit there. You see cars come in, fill up, go out. Each car is there for about 5 minutes. Can you imagine if every one of those cars was there for an hour or an hour and a half? You'd have cars backed up along the road running out of energy for, you know, like the 1970s gas lines again. It would, you know, it's, you know, people have to think these things through. How, you know, how does all this actually work? And if we don't sell any gasoline for cars, well, how is gasoline produced? Well, it's produced in the same plants that produce diesel fuel, as produce bunker fuel that runs ships across the ocean, that produce jet fuel. Well, we're not going to have emergency helicopters that run on batteries. We're not going to fly to Europe on a 747 that runs on batteries. So they need fuel. Well, how much do you figure a gallon of jet fuel is going to cost when we're not producing gasoline anymore? It's going to be tens or hundreds of times more expensive. You know, you have to think these things through, and just saying we're going to decarbonize doesn't think through the logistics of how it actually works. So, you know, those are things that are also happening in the Environment Committee.
Yeah, the other thing is we have had a briefing in Eversource which said basically if everybody went to EVs, we don't have enough power in our grid anyway. So you could be plugging in your car that is being really, you know, charged by a coal-fired plant for all we know. You know, and there's no looking at a total full life cycle analysis of what EVs, what it takes to make the batteries, what it's doing to other parts of the world with the mineral deprivation and the cobalt and everything that's required, and how are they recycled. That's not taken into consideration. That's one of the things I think is really important. When we look at this, we should do like a full life cycle analysis of everything to see truly what is more environmentally friendly. So those are all kinds of issues. And plus, EVs are really expensive, and I don't know how an average person can afford an electric vehicle at this point. I think that we'll end up getting there, but to say you're mandated as of this date to do that, and I thought it was unconstitutional, Mr. Lawyer, right? To say that, to tie the hands of other legislators in the future, but they seem to do that all the time.
I don't want to get there.
Okay.
I don't believe that the legislature should take those choices away from people and away from the market.
I agree.
I think, you know, I want to be able to store my own fuel at my own farm. And if I need to fill up my tractor in the winter time, I want to be able to go to my tank and fill up. You know, we lose power at my farm at least 10 times a year, a minimum. You know, sometimes it's 15 times a year. Well, how am I going to get to work if I can't charge my car? How am I going to run my tractors? One of the biggest problems is the people on the Environment Committee want us to adopt the California emission standards as opposed to federal emission standards. Well, in California, most of California, it's warm in the wintertime. Well, in Connecticut, it gets cold in the wintertime. Batteries don't work very well in the cold. So why in the world would we hook up our emission standards, our battery-related statutes, to a place where the weather is completely different? And that affects how batteries work. It doesn't make any sense.
You're preaching to the choir.
I thought you had your hand up. Did you have-
I was just going to say, they just had it on the news the other night that all the major auto companies are cutting back on the EVs, so they are not even going, if they're not selling, people aren't going to them, so, and the grids aren't conducive to the electricity they're going to require, so I think they came out with them. I thought it was a great idea in the beginning. I think they thought it was a great idea in the beginning, but they didn't check out all the logistics that go along with it.
I just have a quick question. I think I should direct it to you. You were on the Appropriations Committee. There's a proposed bill 5516, and it's basically about the teacher pandemic pension credit that kind of died. And we had a lot of teachers that over a year ago met at the State House to discuss it all, and I was just wondering what happened, if it can be resurrected, looked at again.
You know, we have thousands of bills in appropriations, so I'd have to look that up. If you want to give me a minute,
Sure.
I can figure that out. But I think I can just give you a general, is the Appropriations Committee decided that anything that had a dollar amount associated with it, they're not hearing if it wasn't in the governor's budget, because the Appropriations Committee, which is not me, it's the chairs of the committee, decided that they were not going to produce a budget this year, which means anything that came across their desk, if it was a public health bill, if it was a teacher bill, if it was an environment bill, that had a fiscal note assigned to it, if it wasn't in the governor's budget, it died. It was dead on arrival. So that's probably what happened to that particular bill. That is because the reason why I think the Appropriations Committee did not come out with a budget is because we are in a fiscal, we're looking at a deficit next year. The ARPA funds that we have, which is really scary, they can't give us an accounting as to where they are, how much is spent. In the previous budget, we had ARPA dollars that we could provide for one-time use, but many of the organizations or nonprofits that we gave money to ended up having to rely on that money, and they're looking for it this year, and that's just not going to happen because of the fiscal guardrails that we put in place in 2018 and the fact that the Appropriations Committee is not going to do a budget. So if it's not in the governor's budget, it's not going to go this year.
Did you say 5516? That's
I'm
an
looking at
act
it.
concerning homestead property tax exemptions.
Oh, I thought it was,
No, this is,
no, it was introduced by Representative Doucette,
that was last year's bill, 2023.
but we were told it was going to be voted on this year.
No,
That
at
was
the
last-
end
we
of
have an
every
answer this
session,
year.
every pending bill is dead.
Yeah,
And it all
so
starts over.
we have a different bill
A
number.
different one, okay.
And if it did come to appropriations, it would be dead on arrival if it hasn't.
Because of the budget, okay. Thank you.
I do appreciate everybody's time and coming in to ask questions. All three representatives, you have link information in the back, so
Yep.
if you have follow-up questions and want to discuss any items, that's a great way to do that, is to get the email address and information so you can follow up any questions that were asked tonight, or if you have something else you'd like to bring up, that would be appropriate. I didn't want to cut it too short, but we do have a Charter Revision Committee meeting at 6:30. So while this was a short session like you are in right now, we'll see if we can do another longer session at the next time we get together, maybe an hour and a half. So that way we can go a little further and get more detail. I have lots more things I wanted to ask.
Sure, do you want to, you have 3 minutes, right?
I
You're
don't, but you know
taking
what,
us
I'm
out.
going to email all of you, because I have some questions on a couple of outstanding bills, and I know we talked about one in particular. Just so you know, for the town of Plainfield, I was concerned with the passage of the marijuana bill not because of marijuana, but because of the way the taxation came out. Taxation is the state of Connecticut basically comes up, they get 20%. There's no restrictions. Spend it the way you want. Towns and municipalities have a 3% tax on what businesses are producing. We had a lot of restrictions, and I didn't like the way that it was brought down because it really meant that the town of Plainfield couldn't use that money to come in and pave over different roads. It had to be used specifically for certain items right there on site. So I've been working with legislators talking about those issues. Maybe we'll see if next year they can come up with a better way to utilize that.
And I know you have a nursing home thing, I think that's
Yep.
fixed.
Yes,
There's
sir.
a dispensary or
Not
a
yet.
store?
There will be one.
It's not even dispensary.
Again, thank you all very much for coming out tonight, and we appreciate
And I'll
it.
be out there if anybody wants